The girl was maybe 9 years old, and she was standing in the middle of the driveway when Harlan Beckett pulled through the gates of his own property. She didn't move. His car idled. The gravel crunched under his tires as he slowed to a stop. Through the windshield, he could see her clearly. A child in a yellow raincoat, dark braids tucked behind her ears, staring at him with an expression that didn't belong on a 9-year-old's face. It was the expression of someone who had already decided something, who had already weighed the cost of what they were about to do and accepted it. She pressed one finger to her lips, then she pointed slowly, deliberately, toward the far side of the house, where the gardener's path wound between the cedar hedges and came out behind the sunroom. Harlan didn't know why he listened to her. Later, when people asked him that question, and many people did, he couldn't give a satisfying answer. He was 63 years old. He had built Beckett Infrastructure from a two-man surveying firm into one of the largest civil contracting companies in Western Canada. He had negotiated with municipal governments, navigated environmental tribunals, and survived a hostile takeover attempt in 2019 that had kept him awake for 4 consecutive months. He was not a man who took instruction from strangers, let alone children. And yet he turned off the engine, stepped out of the car quietly, and followed a 9-year-old girl through the cedar hedge. The Beckett property sat on 12 acres outside of Kelowna, in British Columbia's Okanagan Valley. Harlan had bought the land in 2004, when the valley was still more orchard than resort, when you could stand on the back terrace and see nothing but apple trees and brown hills rolling down to the lake. The house itself had been his wife Vivienne's project, a low, wide timber frame structure with a metal roof and a wraparound porch, the kind of house that looked like it had grown out of the hillside rather than been built on it. He had loved it once. Lately, the house felt different to him. He couldn't name exactly when the feeling had started. Sometime, in the past year, perhaps. He would come home from Vancouver or Calgary after a week of meetings and stand in the front hall listening to the silence, and the silence would feel less like peace and more like something held its breath. He had attributed this to fatigue, to the natural distance that accumulates between two people over 31 years, to the fact that their daughter, Rosalind, no, not in the list. He was certain, had moved to Montreal 3 years ago, and the house had lost the buffer her presence provided. Children, Harlan had come to understand, absorb a great deal of tension simply by existing. They require attention and logistics and coordination. They give two people something to look at other than each other. Without Rosalind, the house was very quiet. He had told himself it was fine. Marriages go through seasons. He had read that somewhere, or perhaps heard it from his brother-in-law at Christmas, the kind of thing people say with a glass of wine in their hand. Marriages go through seasons, and you wait for the season to change. He was waiting. The girl's name, he would learn later, was Tilda. Her full name was Matilda Okonkwo Ferris, and she was the granddaughter of the woman who came to clean the house on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Her grandmother, Agnes, no, that name was on the list. Her grandmother's name was Hortense, brought Tilda along sometimes during the school holidays, because Tilda's mother worked early shifts at the hospital in Kelowna and there was no one else to watch her. Hortense had been cleaning the Beckett house for 11 years. She was meticulous and reliable and had a key to the side door. On this particular Tuesday in late September, Tilda had been sitting on the back steps eating a pear while her grandmother worked inside. It was just past 3 in the afternoon. The light was doing what it does in the Okanagan in autumn, going amber and elongated, making everything look slightly more important than it is. That was when Tilda heard the voices from the sunroom. The sunroom was at the back of the house, 3 steps down from the kitchen, a glass and cedar addition that Vivienne had put in 6 years ago for her plants. There were orchids in there, and a Meyer lemon tree, and several ferns that Harlan had always privately found depressing. The sunroom had windows on 3 sides, and its acoustics were strange, sound carried in unexpected directions, bounced off the glass, pooled in corners. Hortense had mentioned this once, casually, in the way you mention things that are just true about a house. Tilda heard voices. She didn't mean to listen. She was 9, and 9-year-olds are not plotting and scheming creatures by nature. They are simply curious in the honest and uncomplicated way that hasn't yet learned to disguise itself. She heard voices, and she stayed still, because she recognized one of them, and she recognized that it didn't sound right. The voice that didn't sound right was Mrs. Beckett's. Tilda had met Mrs. Beckett a handful of times. She was a tall woman, silver-haired, elegant in the effortless way of someone who has never had to think very hard about being elegant. She had always been pleasant to Tilda in the distant manner of adults who approve of children in the abstract, but have no particular interest in any specific one. She had once given Tilda a book about a girl who solved mysteries in 1920s London. Tilda had liked the book, actually, But the voice she heard now was not the voice of a woman giving out books. It was low and careful, and it had the quality of a voice that has been thinking about something for a very long time and is now finally saying it out loud. "He goes through Peachland on Tuesdays," the voice said. "He always stops at that pull-off on the lake road. He's been doing it for years. He thinks I don't know about it, but I've known for years." A pause. Then a man's voice, not Harlan's. Someone Tilda didn't recognize. "And you want it to look like what, exactly?" "An accident," Vivienne said. "The road's narrow there. There's no guardrail for about 400 meters. It curves." The man said something Tilda couldn't hear clearly. She had pressed herself against the cedar siding of the house by now, not breathing. Then Vivienne again. "The policy is clear. I've read it 3 times. It's 2.4 million, and it pays out regardless. The only thing that voids it is if the manor is suspicious, so it needs to not be suspicious." Another pause. "His assistant knows his route," Vivienne continued. "I've already dealt with that." Tilda had no idea what "dealt with that" meant. She was 9, but she understood enough. She had read enough mystery books. Not just the one about the girl in 1920s London, but others, many others, because Tilda was a serious reader, to understand the basic architecture of what she had just heard. Mrs. Beckett was talking about hurting Mr. Beckett. Mrs. Beckett was talking about hurting him on the road and making it look like an accident and collecting money because of it. Tilda sat very still on the back steps and felt the pear in her hand and thought, "What do you do now?" She was still sitting there, thinking, when she heard the sound of tires on gravel from the front of the house. She went around quickly, through the narrow gap between the cedar hedge and the garden shed, because it was faster than going through the house. She came out onto the driveway just as a dark gray Land Rover was rolling through the gate. Mr. Beckett. She knew him from the photographs in the house. There was one in the front hall, him and Mrs. Beckett at some kind of event, and one in the study that she had seen through the open door while she waited for her grandmother, once, him in a hard hat, shaking hands with someone in front of a bridge. He was older looking in person than in the photographs, or maybe it was the afternoon light. He had the kind of face that has been outside a lot, weathered and careful. She put her finger to her lips. She pointed toward the path. She didn't know if he would listen. She thought he probably wouldn't. Adults, in Tilda's experience, did not generally take direction from 9-year-olds standing in driveways. But she had to try. She had absolutely to try. He turned off the engine. He got out of the car. He followed her. She led him down the gardener's path, past the compost bins, around the back of the equipment shed, to the far corner of the property where the old apple tree stood. A remnant of the orchard that had been here before the house, gnarled and enormous, its branches low enough to sit in. Tilda liked this tree. She had spent part of the previous Thursday in it, which her grandmother did not know about. She stopped there, in the shadow of the apple tree, and looked at Harlan Beckett. He was breathing slightly harder from the walk. He was watching her with an expression she could not read, not the blank benevolence adults usually aimed at children, but something more genuine. Attention. The kind that meant he was actually trying to understand. "Mr. Beckett," she said, "I think someone is trying to hurt you." He said nothing for a moment. Then, "What's your name?" "Tilda. My grandmother cleans your house." "Hortense." He nodded slowly. "Tell me what you heard." So she told him. She repeated it as accurately as she could, in the way she had trained herself through reading. Details matter. Sequence matters. Say what you actually know and not what you're guessing. She told him about the sunroom, and the man's voice she didn't recognize, and the road near Peachland, and the pull-off by the lake, and 2.4 million, and dealt with that. She watched his face while she talked. He didn't interrupt. He didn't look at her the way she had feared he might. The indulgent, slightly impatient look adults use when they're preparing to explain why a child has misunderstood something. He listened the way she listened when someone was telling her something important. Completely. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "The man," he said finally. "The other voice. Can you describe it?" "It was lower than yours." He talked faster. He had an accent. Not a strong one, but there. Maybe French? Not French. More like Quebecois, Tilda considered. Maybe. "I don't know the difference very well." Harlan nodded again. He looked away toward the lake, which was just visible through a gap in the property's western tree line, silver and flat in the afternoon light. His face had done something while she was talking. She couldn't describe it exactly. It wasn't surprise, or rather, it was a very particular kind of surprise, the kind that isn't surprised at all, the kind that has been quietly expecting something and now finds that the thing it expected has finally arrived. "Tilda," he said, "I need to ask you something important. I need you to go back inside with your grandmother, and I need you to not say anything to anyone about what you told me. Not tonight, not for a few days." "Can you do that?" She thought about it seriously. Why? Because I need to be sure before I do anything. And because if the wrong people find out you heard this, you might be in danger too. She hadn't considered that part. She thought about it now. Okay, she said. I'm going to sort this out, he said. And when it's sorted, I'm going to tell you everything that happened, because you deserve to know. You did something very brave today. Tilda looked at the apple tree rather than at him. I just told you what I heard, she said. I know, said Harlan Beckett. That's the brave part. He did not go into the house that evening. He went back to his car, reversed quietly out through the gate, and drove to the pull-off on the lake road near Peachland. He had been stopping there for 11 years. It had started the year after they built the house, the first autumn, when he was driving back from a site visit to Penticton and had pulled over simply because the lake looked too beautiful to drive past. He had done it every Tuesday since. It had become one of those small private rituals that accumulate in a life without anyone quite deciding on them. A pause, 10 minutes of lake and silence before the driveway, the house, the evening's negotiations. He stood by the guardrail. There was a guardrail here, not the 400 meters without one that Vivian had described. That section was another kilometer south. And he looked at the lake and he thought about what a 9-year-old girl had just told him. He had known, he realized, not this, not specifically this, but the general shape of it, the direction things were moving, the temperature of his own marriage, the way Vivian had been looking at him for the past year, like a woman doing arithmetic. He had known something was wrong in the way you know. Weather is coming before you can see the clouds. A pressure in the air, a change in how light falls, something altered in the quality of the silence. He had not known it would come to this. He stood there for a long time. The lake went from silver to gray to the particular deep blue it gets just before the light leaves entirely. Somewhere on the far shore, lights were coming on. Then he got back in his car and drove to Kelowna, to the office of a man named Sutherland. Not on the list. He was Sir Douglas Sutherland, his personal attorney of 22 years, a small, fierce man from Nova Scotia, who had been beside Harlan for every significant transaction and crisis of his professional life, and who had, more than once, saved him from himself. Douglas Sutherland was still at his desk at 6:45 in the evening, because Douglas Sutherland was always still at his desk at 6:45 in the evening. He looked up when Harlan came through the door without knocking. He read something in Harlan's face immediately. Douglas was very good at reading faces. Close the door, he said. What followed over the next 8 days was the most methodical thing Harlan had done in his life, and he was a methodical man by nature. Douglas engaged on an emergency retainer, a private investigative firm from Vancouver that specialized in what Douglas called delicately domestic matters of a complex nature. The firm sent 2 people, a woman named Priscilla Vance, who looked like a retired schoolteacher, and moved through the world with a schoolteacher's patient attention to everything, and her partner, a younger man who was introduced only as Kelso, and who didn't say much but who had. Harlan noticed the habit of photographing things with his phone in a way that looked entirely natural. Priscilla, Vance, and Kelso spent 6 days learning the shape of Vivian's recent movements. What they found was not complicated, in the way that betrayal is almost never complicated. It is only painful, and the simplicity of it is part of what makes it painful. The man in the sunroom was named Bertrand Lachance. He was 51 years old, a contractor from Montreal who had moved to the Okanagan 4 years ago and had built a small reputation doing high-end residential renovations in West Kelowna. He had done work on a neighbor's property 2 years prior. That was how he and Vivienne had met. The relationship had been going on. Priscilla estimated based on phone records and other documentation she was careful not to explain in detail for approximately 18 months. The insurance policy, Douglas said, reading Priscilla's summary in his office while Harlan sat across from him. She took it out 14 months ago. She added it to the existing household policy. She didn't mention it to you? No, Harlan said. She named herself as sole beneficiary. I know. Douglas put the papers down. He took off his reading glasses and set them on the desk. Harlan, the phone records include 3 calls in the past 2 weeks to a number registered to a numbered company in Alberta. The company has no web presence and no apparent commercial activity. Priscilla believes it is connected to a man with a history of. He paused, choosing the word carefully. Facilitation. Harlan said, "Nothing. This has moved." Douglas said, "Into territory that we are obligated to take to the police." I know. I want you to be ready for what that means. Procedurally, practically, in terms of what happens to the company when this becomes. I know, Harlan said again. Douglas looked at him. How are you? Harlan thought about the lake, the way the light left it. I'll tell you when this is finished, he said. The call to the RCMP came on a Thursday morning, 8 days after Tilda had stood in his driveway with her finger to her lips. It was not a single call, and it did not produce immediate results in the way that television suggests it does. There were meetings, and then more meetings, and then the kind of administrative processes that Douglas navigated on Harlan's behalf with his characteristic combination of precision and barely contained impatience. There were questions about the provenance of the evidence. There were questions about the phone records and how they had been obtained. There were, as there always are, questions about questions. But the RCMP had its own concerns already, it turned out. The numbered company in Alberta was not unknown to them. Bertrand Lachance was taken into custody on the following Tuesday. A coincidence of timing that Harlan would notice later with a feeling he couldn't quite name. On the same day, on that same Tuesday, Vivian was contacted and asked to come in for a conversation. She went, accompanied by a lawyer she had apparently retained 3 weeks prior, which Douglas noted with the tight expression of a man filing information away. Harlan was not present for any of this. He was at the pull-off on the lake road near Peachland, standing by the actual section of road without the guardrail, looking at the curve. It wasn't dramatic. It was just a curve on a mountain road, the kind that exists in hundreds on every highway in British Columbia, the kind you drive without thinking. Trees close to the shoulder. A drop on the right that went down a long way. He stood there for a while. Then he got back in the car. Hortense came on Thursday as usual. Harlan was there when she arrived, which was unusual. He was ordinarily in Vancouver or at the Kelowna office by 7:30, and Hortense arrived at 8. She stopped in the doorway when she saw him at the kitchen table with his coffee. "Mr. Beckett," she said. She had 11 years of practiced composure, but there was something alert in her eyes. "Hortense," he said, "did you bring Tilda?" A pause. "She's at school today." Of course. He should have remembered. It was October now. School was back. "I was hoping to see her." He paused. "I wanted to thank her." Hortense was quiet for a moment. She set her bag down on the bench by the door, the same spot she had set it for 11 years. "She told me," she said finally. "After, a few days after. She said she thought you would want her to wait before she told me." "I did. She was right. She said you told her she was brave." Hortense's voice was composed, but something moved through it. "She's been thinking about that." "She was," Harlan said. "She is." He looked down at his coffee cup. "I want you to know that she's safe, that both of you are safe. Everything has been, the situation has been addressed. There are people involved now who will make sure nothing comes back to her." Hortense nodded. She had the manner of a woman who understood the weight of things without needing to be told their precise dimensions. "And I want." Harlan paused. He had thought about this part. He had thought about it carefully because he was wary of doing it wrong. "I want to do something for Tilda. Not because I owe her. Because she did something good, and good things should be met with something. I don't know exactly what that means yet. I thought I should ask you first what would be appropriate." Hortense looked at him for a long moment. "She wants to be a doctor," she said. "She's been saying it since she was 6. She researches universities on her mother's phone." Harlan nodded slowly. "Then let's make sure she has what she needs to get there." He said it simply, without flourish, because it was a simple thing. It's transaction of the most basic human kind. Something good happened, and so something good should happen in return. Hortense picked up her bag and then put it down again. She was not a woman who cried. Harlan suspected, or rather, she was a woman who had trained herself carefully not to, in the way that people who have been responsible for other people for a very long time often do. But something shifted in her face, briefly, before composure came back. "I'll tell her," she said. "Tilda came to the house that Saturday, with her mother, a tired-looking woman named Dr. Amara Okonkwo-Ferris, who worked at Kelowna General, and who had clearly been briefed by Hortense on the general shape of things, though not, Harlan suspected, on all of the specific details. Dr. Okonkwo-Ferris had the careful, assessing manner of someone deciding whether to trust a situation, and Harlan respected it. They sat on the back porch in the October sun, which was warm still in the Okanagan the way it gets in early fall, the leaves turning on the hillsides above the lake, the air smelling of something ending and something that hasn't started yet. Harlan told Tilda what had happened. He told her the version appropriate for a 9-year-old, which was, in fact, most of the version, because Tilda was not a child who required or appreciated the protective softening of facts. He told her that the man from the sunroom had been arrested. He told her that the situation was being handled by people whose job it was to handle such situations. He told her that she was not in any danger, and had not been in danger since shortly after she spoke to him, and would not be in danger going forward. Tilda listened to all of this with her hands folded in her lap, seriously, the way she had listened to him in the shadow of the apple tree. "What about Mrs. Beckett?" she asked. Harlan had thought about how to answer this. "She's also being dealt with by the people whose job that is," he said. Tilda nodded. She seemed to accept this as sufficient. They sat for a moment in the easy silence that Harlan had not experienced in this house in a long time. Or perhaps it was not the house, perhaps it was him. Perhaps he was different now, in some minor but permanent way, the way a material changes when it's been subjected to a particular kind of stress. "Miss Beckett," Tilda said, "can I ask you something?" "Yes. When I was standing in the driveway, why did you listen to me? You didn't know me." He had been asked this question several times by now in various forms. By Douglas, by Priscilla Vance, by his brother who had called from Toronto when the story began to surface through the kind of unofficial channels through which stories surface. By a journalist who had found his number somehow, whose call he had not returned. He had not, until now, been able to answer it satisfactorily. He looked at Tilda, at this 9-year-old with the serious face and the dark braids, and the finger pressed to her lips in the afternoon light, and he thought about what it had actually been that moment in the driveway, what he had actually seen. "You looked," he said slowly, "like you already knew what it was going to cost you to do it, and you were going to do it anyway." Tilda thought about this. "I was scared," she said. "I know," said Harlan. "That's still the brave part." The lake was visible from the back porch, through the western tree line, a strip of blue between the hills. It caught the light the way it always did in October, the particular clear light of a season winding down, making everything look precise and a little sad and very worth looking at. Harlan Beckett looked at it, for the first time in longer than he could name. The silence felt like what it was supposed to feel like peace.